Hey, I'm sitting down with Oakley Anderson Moore, writer, cinematographer, rock climber extraordinaire, and I happen to also know she has a pretty amazing garden.
I do
But
all of those talents equally poorly.
I know that's not true. I've told you this. We're really excited to have you as one of the first year group of filmmakers for the Bureau. We really love your work, and we're also really excited to see you jump from documentary to narrative. I think that's going to be super fun.
Thanks, Erica. And I'll just say, thank you guys, you and Mike, the people behind the Bureau of Creative Works. I'm proud to be a part of the whole process, of the whole project.
As a director who just finished your first feature-length film, did you want to talk a little bit about that experience and how that's influencing your next project?
Sure. My first feature was a documentary called Brave New Wild, and it took about almost 6 years to get it in the can. And the process on that was basically, I had a period of research, but I'd also grown up knowing the material because part of the story is a personal one with my father, who's a subject in the documentary about climbers from the 60s and 70s. But the other large part of the process is we did about 2 years where we did a series of road trips in questionably proficient vehicles to various people to do interviews with them. And, I just absorbed, we did just 1 to 3 hour long, sometimes interviews with all these different people.
Oh, wow.
And the process was taking that and consolidating that with a different research tangent, which involved finding what archives there were and trying to piece together thematic relationships between what everyone is saying. And the ultimate, the final film is really like this rumination about what it is to, be involved in doing something, the search for the unknown, or doing something that may or may not be possible or impossible. And looking at that lens through both, the absurdity and the beauty of what comes with that kind of pursuit. So it was like a very drawn out process, but an interesting one. And I feel like it's a lot like making that kind of film. I don't know if other documentary filmmakers feel similar, but I felt like it was a lot more like making an experimental film than it was making a narrative film. So that was really challenging. And now that the film I'm going to make through the Bureau is going to be a narrative, it is definitely a change that's a little bit frightening because you're like, well, I know I can make this, but everything I just did for a very long time was making these 1 or 2 documentaries. But, for me, just pursuing and searching for this way in which to express to other people what it's like to be searching for unknown answers or impossible pursuits. I think thematically, since the first film was about climbing in the 60s and 70s, and this one will be loosely about climbing on Mars, there's obviously things that carry over thematically, and I think that's, that will inform the film for the Bureau. I'm excited to do something that's quicker and it's a much different creative pursuit. I think we'll see. And of course, it's frightening. Like, I think I can do this. Let's see if I can. And I write for No Film School, so on a regular basis, I'm watching and talking to filmmakers who are, making these really cool films with no budgets. And so I'm really going to draw a lot from that to put this one together. I think that everyone, in particular narrative filmmakers, should make a documentary. And a documentary that they wholeheartedly upholds a standard of quality where they want to make something really amazing, because I think it's been a really interesting experience and a very long experience, and it's been a very difficult one, but I think that it's something that can really benefit all storytellers. So I'm really glad that I started with my first film as a documentary, and I would encourage everyone, even if they think that they're exclusively into making narratives, to try their hand at a documentary. I've talked to a lot of different people in the documentary world, and there's this sort of kind of excitement around documentary right now. And I've heard a couple different people say this is the golden age. We're having a golden age of documentary storytelling right now, which I think is kind of true, just because the form has been so expanded and there's so many filmmakers trying different things that before, maybe documentary had maybe a bit more narrow constraints, but part and parcel with the industry moving and technology changing, so many different filmmakers are coming out with different ways of telling stories that are in fact considered documentary. I think with that in mind, it's a great time to make a documentary, and I recommend it even if you consider yourself a narrative filmmaker.
I saw juniper behind you.
This is my dog over here. She's actually probably has more storytelling possibilities than I do.
Hi, Sugar. As a director who happens to be female, do you want to talk about your experience in that regard?
So the two films that I just made, I made a feature and a short that are unrelated but related in theme. One of them follows climbing in the 70s and one of them follows climbing in the 60s, and also a personal story where I go back through time to understand my father and why he was a dirtbag climber for, around 15 years. So those are the two films I made. And yes, climbing in the 60s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I mean, it changed as time went on, even within that short time period, but it was a very male-dominated world. Which is not to say that females weren't climbing back then. It's just that the amount of females doing first ascents, was smaller than the amount of men. The film that I made was, in that sense of the word, like about a very male-dominated world. And, film today is a very male-dominated world. There's just an appalling lack of female directors in charge of big budget films, and even not big budget films, for whatever reason. I have a few ideas on the reasons, but there's not that many of us who are getting chosen and invested in, to be at the helm of the films. And yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was interesting, when I made Brave New Wild, I spoke to a couple women who were truly exceptional women climbing in the 60s and beyond, at a point in time where, it really wasn't even encouraged for women to wear pants, so you can imagine a woman who's going to leave her, quit her job, or, leave the comfort of society and sleep in the dirt in a sleeping bag in order to pursue rock climbing. I mean, women doing that at that point in time are truly exceptional. Right. And because of all the societal pressures that are even stronger, arguably, that they would face to want to pursue that. And so one person I spoke to, her name is Elaine Matthews. She was a well-known climber in the Gunks, but she also climbed in Yosemite and, across the United States. She said something that I really took to heart that was very interesting about, I asked her, was it difficult to climb as a woman in the 60s? And she said, yes, it was hard to find partners. It was hard to find people that, wanted to swap leads with her. And she said when it really came down to it for her, part of the process of becoming a climber who did that was just proving to herself that she could do that, because there weren't any other women who were swapping leads, doing first ascents. She didn't know anyone else who had done it. She didn't quite know even if, she was, was it possible for her as a woman to climb a strenuous climb up a granite, unclimbed granite pitch in Yosemite. And so
question that came into her mind is as a woman, can I even do this? Do I have the physical strength?
Which goes back to this concept of doing things that are unknown. Is it possible? If there's no role models or women that have done something before you, can you even do it? And climbing is part physical, but it's also part mental. It's part engineering, knowing what you're doing as you go up. And so for her, the big challenge was, can I actually do it? So a lot of her work was proving it to herself. And I think that's something that, that really resonated with me, because there are plenty of people who, may tell you that you can't do something. I mean, that is something that I have experienced. People saying, well, you're probably not the right person for this particular film for whatever reason. And you just can't buy into that kind of stuff. The only thing that you can do is just prove to yourself what you can do and take that as a personal challenge. And there are people out there that want to hear all kinds of diverse voices from people that don't normally get access in the film industry that we see today to be able to tell certain stories. So for me, I just take it as a personal challenge, and be damned when anybody else thinks if they don't think I can do it.
I think all women are going definitely the right direction, and just, especially now, we're all standing up and sort of demanding that respect and demanding these opportunities.
Just to riff off what you're talking about, you sometimes read about why aren't there more women in my particular vein of filmmaking? Which I guess is loosely described as adventure filmmaking.
Yeah.
I mean, the same question should be asked of all filmmaking, but so it's well, where are all the adventure filmmakers that are women? My personal opinion is that we're out here. We're here. I'm making films. There are other women like me making films. Whether or not other people are deciding to invest in our films, or whether or not other people are programming our films, I think is the question. But we're out here and we have stories to tell.
Good stories to tell too.
I mean, or equally mediocre stories, whatever. But still, I should be, afforded the same opportunity to tell these.
I won't include this because I'm going to ramble. It just dawned on me recently, like before I met Mike, I was just someone who, I just liked movies. I didn't know a lot about how movies were made, or, I wasn't the person that like knew who the directors were and like kept up with all of that stuff. I just liked movies, and I went to the theater and I rented movies, and I would occasionally, go to like we had a couple of small theaters in town that would play like, movies that you don't see on the big screen. And so that was sort of my only experience in any kind of film. And the only reason I'm saying that is because when I met Mike, he's obviously been completely into film and every aspect of filmmaking from the time he was very young. And so I started learning about all of these things and being exposed to all of these different kinds of films, suddenly able to consume that. And I know where to find those things. In making the Bureau, we wanted to provide a place for filmmakers to experiment because we think that that's so important. But we also, one of the things we really want to do is to re-educate audience. And I think that that's as important as anything else that we're doing, because from someone who came from the general public, I didn't know where to find other films. I didn't know where to access these things. And so I feel like that's another like big goal of the Bureau, is to really bring all of these wonderful stories, whether they're silly or poignant or scary or whatever they are, to just everyone, and I don't know why I was rambling on about that. I think I was coming to a point. That was my point. Do you want to talk about a little bit why you feel it's important to, as a filmmaker, as a writer, why it's important to be able to experiment?
I definitely think it's liberating to make something that's shorter in content. The scope of your project is smaller sometimes, not always, but a lot of times. And most of all, it takes less money, it takes less resources, and it takes less time to make something short. And, one thing I said, I wrote this in, the questions that you had asked me to answer was, that I've seen a lot of short films on Vimeo that have far outmatched in creativity and content than I've seen in theaters. And I think that suggests that there are a lot of people out there, a lot of unusual voices telling creative stories that, just like I watched a short and there's like every once in a while you come across something just so beautiful, just completely makes your heart swell. And like I haven't experienced that as often in theaters. And I think part of that is that people, when they get to make something shorter, they get to make something with more creative risks. And a lot of the things that I've been doing in film is talking about what risk is and what does that mean to the human experience. Because every artist is kind of figuring out who they are and deciding what their voice is. And that's something that, can get really stymied by putting all this effort into one feature-length thing. And I've seen it happen to a lot of people who would have otherwise maybe found a really creative voice. So I think, having the ability to make something shorter, it can be really important. Giving access to more people to creatively, to come up and play creatively with shorter content is important to our cultural dialogue as a whole, because I think that that's what filmmaking, ultimately is. It's just an expression of, who we are. Even if we're completely telling different diverse stories, it's still adding to our cultural dialogue, expressing who we are and what our current things in our society are. Experiment with these creative voices because it's extremely valuable to us as a culture.
I think there should be, and I don't think there is right now, but there should be like a sense of responsibility to bring quality stories to, and I think those quality stories do come from a very personal place, like you were saying. They come from, and it takes a talented, capable person to share a personal story in a way that can connect with the audience. And so I absolutely agree. I'm taking over this interview. I agree that you guys need a space to share your ideas. Did you want to talk about the film that you want to do for the Bureau at all?
Sure. I'll give it a whack.
Give it a whack.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't completely solidified everything. So, it's possible that some of these things I'm telling you might change. I live here in northern Arizona, and everywhere around me are landscapes that look essentially Mars-like. And I've been driving through these areas and hiking through these areas thinking, wow, this, definitely must be what it must feel like to be on Mars. So I'd been thinking about how to utilize that because I thought, well, such a cool aspect of production. If you're trying to make a film on a low budget, you want to use something that you have at your disposal that nobody else has, or that you have that can up your production value, for example. And on top of that, I've worked on and off a couple years for a little observatory out here, and located on Mars Hill Road is the name of the street where their observatory is. Their founder in 1897 first came out here on a train from the East Coast looking for the best possible place to set up a telescope to observe Mars on its closest rotation to the Earth. I learned a lot of stuff, and they have a whole team of working astronomers dealing with contemporary issues there. Anything from like analyzing the atmosphere, the methane gas emissions from Pluto, to, the search for life in the universe. So it's just been a fun environment that I've been lucky enough to do video work for them. And so I just have absorbed, questions of astronomy today. And of course, right now everyone's so excited about this potential one-way mission to Mars. I just have known for a while, like, oh, it would be a lot of fun to kind of tap into that excitement, use what I know, and also play with that sort of, not exactly hysteria, but this way that people get really excited about certain things and just kind of have fun, playing within that realm. It's like the exploration of the unknown, but then also having a little fun with that, not taking it too seriously, or trying to have a balance that complements each other with those two elements. So that's basically, so I've been thinking in my head about how to use those elements and what would be something interesting, something somewhat realistic. And at some point, I think NASA released this photograph, this drawing of a climber climbing up one of the many numerous gigantic cliffs on Mars. And I know there's many climbers that have looked at that and just been like, good God, when do we get to go there? There's like an amazing assortment of cliffs in a pointless pursuit to climb them, to something that should be enjoyable and part inspiring but part humorous. And
usual Oakley stuff.
Exactly.
Thank you for taking the time.
I'm excited to see everyone else's films and to see everyone's films that come in the years from now when the Bureau becomes a even bigger, short film collective.
Yes. Thank you so much. We are too. Yes. I'll talk to you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.